Lawmakers in the Texas Capitol are pushing back against the CDC's new recommendation that the COVID shot be mandated for kids. Plus, Texas schools are asking for $15 billion more from Texas taxpayers. I'm Braden Waltons. This is the headline. Well, the Federal Centers for Disease Control and Prevention made big news last week as they moved to require the COVID shot for school children. One lawmaker pushing back against that and leading others in the charge is State Representative Brian Harrison. Representative Harrison, thank you so much for joining us.
You bet. Great to see you.
When this news came out about a week ago that the CDC was going to be adding the COVID shot to their recommended childhood vaccine schedule, you pointed out that Texas's own Department of Health and Human Services said that all CDC recommended vaccines were required for school children. You pointed that out, and they acted pretty quickly to take down those references.
Yeah, they did, and just to back up a hair for your viewers here, I mean, the reason this was so shocking is because the immunizations that typically get added to CDC's, immunization schedule for children usually have a lot of longitudinal data, robust clinical data showing efficacy in the population that they're targeting here. This CDC did it without any of that whatsoever. I mean, no clinical data, no evidence that it works with that population of children, completely anti-scientific, purely a political move by the Biden administration, the same Biden administration that lied apparently when they said they were going to follow the science. So when they did this, I was very critical of their decision to do that for two reasons. One, it just creates mass confusion across the country with what this will mean for, if you're a parent, you've got kids in school, what does this recommendation mean? Does it mean my kid has to get vaccinated? And then the other, unfortunately, a lot of states and localities do blindly defer to just whatever the CDC says. And so I was, going to go on and post some comments critical of the CDC's decision, but I wanted to make sure that the state of Texas, of course, didn't do that ourselves. And I was unpleasantly surprised to find that on our State Department website, there was the page where it explains, hey, back to school procedures, here's what's required for your kid. And, it said, and I've got it here, it says, any, whether heading to kindergarten, junior high, college or college children need, quote, all CDC recommended vaccines. And so in light of the fact that CDC put the COVID vaccination on that schedule, a plain reading of the Texas Health Department's website would lead you to believe that the state of Texas was in fact requiring it for all school children. So I pointed that out, and then I am pleased to report that I did work with the state health agency, and their office confirmed to me that was not their position, and they did take that problematic language off their website rather quickly, and I do appreciate the swift action.
Yeah, and it's worth noting, by the way, we're sitting here talking with State Representative Brian Harrison, who is also formerly the Chief of Staff for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services under President Trump, and so certainly have some experience dealing with agencies like this. Do you think this was just a miscommunication on their part or something else?
The CDC?
The Texas Department, the state.
Yeah, I think the CDC knew what they were doing, unfortunately. It's unclear to me. I don't want to assume motivations. I did appreciate their office did assure mine that they were not, coming at this from a different perspective, than I was. I think, if I were them, if I were advising them, I would recommend, putting out a statement to end all doubt because, my constituents are very concerned about this. I know thousands or perhaps millions of Texas parents are very concerned about the implications of what the CDC's decision means for their child. And so that's one of the reasons that I did put the letter out, and I'm sure we'll talk about that, is you mentioned I was the chief of staff at HHS under President Trump, and what a lot of people don't necessarily realize is that the CDC is one of our subordinate agencies. So I was the chief of staff of the agency that actually oversees the CDC. And so I'm very familiar with how they work, and I also know the limits of their authority. And I wanted to make it very clear, I almost felt duty-bound or obligated, having served in that position, to clarify for my constituents and for all Texans that the CDC, just putting it on this recommendation, the state of Texas has no obligation whatsoever to follow these guidelines. And then, in fact, this recommendation was so egregious that I felt like we needed to publicly and explicitly reject those recommendations. And that's why I wrote the letter, and I'm really glad that 19 of my colleagues joined me in that. Yeah,
so you wrote this letter to the CDC. In that letter, you talk about how you and your colleagues are going to work in the next session to push back against some of these mandates. I think this is a big issue that people look at, especially the last legislative session last year, and say this was a missed opportunity. Do you think that there's going to be more opportunity next year when the legislature reconvenes to put an end to these sorts of mandates?
Oh, I think there has to be. I was sworn into the legislature with only 8 days to go in the final special session, but I wasted no time. I drew upon my experience at HHS. Having helped launch Operation Warp Speed and had been involved with vaccine and COVID-related policies since the very beginning. And I filed the Texas COVID Vaccine Freedom Act because while I'm proud of the work helping launch Operation Warp Speed, I voluntarily took a vaccination for COVID myself. What's far more concerning to me than a virus is a loss of liberty. And I view this vaccine mandate as purely a liberty and a role of government issue. And if we, as a freedom-loving state of Texas, can allow unelected bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. to force needles into our arms against our will, you might as well give up on the entirety of the 10th Amendment, state sovereignty, medical freedom, informed consent, and I would argue the whole premise of the Constitution. Congress and the Senate and the President didn't get together and pass a bill to enact these mandates. An unelected bureaucrat at my old agency put them out, and apparently we have unelected bureaucrats in state health departments all across the country blindly deferring to the CDC, and that will result, the CDC's action, make no mistake about it, it will result in millions of school children being vaccinated against the wishes of their parents. And I'm going to make sure we don't do that here in Texas. I'm going to refile that bill. There is no reason the state of Texas should tolerate COVID vaccine mandates at this point.
For citizens who want to help out with this effort, who want to see these sorts of mandates put to an end in the upcoming session, how can they make their voices heard?
Oh, let their representatives know. I'm a member of the House of Representatives, but the House of Representatives and the Senate, because I think we should pass this mandate prohibition legislatively. That's the way our constitutions are set up. The people expect that the people that they vote for and sit in those chairs as their proxy do the hard work of governing. So we need the House and the Senate to pass a bill that would legislatively outlaw these mandates. And so I would recommend they call their House of Representative member, call their state senator, let the governor's office know. The issue is not going away. To this day, we have Texans in the military, people who are in the healthcare sector, still having their lives and careers ruined by these tyrannical vaccine mandates. The state of Texas, I'm sad to say, has not yet banned or outlawed these COVID vaccine mandates. It's a moral imperative that we do it. I am optimistic. The bill I introduced, even though it was just with a few days to go in the session, it quickly got, I think, almost 50 co-sponsors on that legislation. I expect that we'll be able to pass that next session. We must do it.
Representative Brian Harrison, thank you for being on the front lines of this fight and joining us today.
Always good to talk to you, Brandon.
Well, early voting has already started in the Lone Star State. That's right. We've got one more week of early voting next week. And then, of course, Tuesday, November 8th is the election. But it's not just Robert, Beto O'Rourke, and Greg Abbott on that ballot. No, you've got other races, other statewide races, and even some down ballot issues. Here to talk about a couple of those, we have Michael Quinn Sullivan, our publisher. Michael, thank you so much for stopping by. Always a pleasure.
Oh, yeah. Nice to be this morning, Brandon.
We were talking about this ballot and this statewide ballot of Democrats. It's very easy to focus on what Beto O'Rourke has been up to. But you look at the rest of the statewide ticket that Democrats have in particular, and you've got some really interesting contrasts. And the one I wanted to talk about to start out here is this race for a Texas Attorney General, where you have Rochelle Garza, the Democrat candidate, who's running against Ken Paxton, who's the incumbent, been in there since was elected to the office in 2014, running for his third term. And you have this really interesting contrast because on one hand, you have Attorney General Paxton, who's got, a record of being out there that you can see with conservative ideals, I would say. But then Rochelle Garza, not only is she a Democrat, but she also has some very interesting questionable things that she's done in her own private practice in her background.
Yeah, when kind of with the Halloween theme, she's scary as Attorney General. She is scary. Beto O'Rourke is a joke. Mike Collier is just kind of a guy who likes running for office, running for lieutenant governor. As a Democrat, and then you've got Rochelle Garza, who is she's bad. She is. As Attorney General should be horrible in large part because of what we know that she says that she believes, and you look at her actions. 2 years ago, she was calling Border Patrol and law enforcement agents and folks down trying to stem the tide of illegal immigration. She called them terrorists. She said that they're down the border terrorizing border communities, this kind of thing. Just insane. And now you want her to be the chief law enforcement officer in Texas? I don't think so. You also look, I'm going to be very clear. Every person in our judicial system is entitled to a lawyer, and that you've got men and women who go to law school and they sign up to be on the random rotation of defending scum and villainy to ensure that their constitutional rights are still respected. And we think that's important as a nation. And yet Rochelle Garza, in her private practice, she seeks out the scum and villainy, representing a sex trafficker, representing someone involved in the drug trade, representing a repeat illegal alien, not where the court assigned her to do this, but where she stepped in and said, hey, I can make some money off of these people. She's bad. So there's very little indication that she'd be anything other than bad. Couple that then, we've got at least another 2 years of the Joe Biden administration. And I think that it kind of beggars belief that she would continue to be pursuing the Biden administration, pursuing big tech, pursuing the ne'er-do-wells out there the way Ken Paxton has been.
And it's been interesting to see at the same time, and you've written as much up at TexasScorecard.com, that, the Republican establishment that always tells us to rally around, right? Rally around the nominees is maybe sort of helping the Democrats this time around.
Well, look, there's a group called Texans for Lawsuit Reform. They're $25+ million in cash on hand in their bank account, doing nothing in the AG's race. Now, there's a group focused on allegedly on judicial issues, and yet doing nothing to help Ken Paxton. And many of the things that they used against Ken Paxton, when they literally were the funders of Eva Guzman, who no one remembers because she came from a distant third in the Republican primary, very liberal Republican, and they funded all these talking points for her to use attacking Ken Paxton. Didn't go over well with Republican primary voters, obviously. But now you see those same talking points being used against Ken Paxton now by the Democrats. And it really does at this point make you think, man, who does TLR want to win? Do they want the Democrat to win or the Republican to win? They certainly are doing things to help Ken Paxton. In fact, the founder of the group told me that, other people can save Ken Paxton. Oh, man, that's great. I'm going to encase your feet in concrete and let someone else save your life, but swim hard, kind of thing. That's pretty rotten. And particularly when TLR, as a bunch of moderates, have most of their political history has been around, chastising conservatives for supporting conservative candidates in primaries, and then turning around and when the more liberal Republicans win, chastising conservatives for not sufficiently supporting, the liberal Republicans. So it really is amazing to see. Look, I don't like anything on the other hand. I like that they're revealing themselves. I think that's good for voters, good for a lot of those donors who thought, businessmen and others who thought, they go out and just fight for business interests. I'm not sure what business interest is served by having Rochelle Garza as the Attorney General of Texas.
Yeah, going from one end of the ballot down to the other, in many places in Texas, not everywhere, but many places, you'll have some local elections on that November ballot, including $15 billion worth of school bonds proposed on the ballot. I think there's $21 billion in bonds total that are on the ballot, but $15 billion going to school districts. And man, it seems like every election, we saw this happen back during the May election where you had billions of dollars in school bonds. Now you've got more on this November ballot. And, a lot of people are looking at this on one hand, and then at the same time, they're looking at some of the stories we're seeing about the state of public education, even specifically here in Texas. And the two just aren't computing with each other.
Yeah, look, you look in a lot of the school districts, particularly the large school districts, have declining enrollment. So numbers are going down, and yet those very same school districts, we need more money to educate fewer kids. Because if there's more kids, that's more costs more money. If there are fewer kids, it costs even more money. So how that math works is difficult to understand. Second, the kids that remain. What we're finding, the latest release of the national test scores showing Texas kids, downward performance levels. Now, we saw that nationwide. Texas had maybe a slightly lower rate of decrease than other states, But when you're the least drunk person in the bar, you still shouldn't drive, and we shouldn't be applauding ourselves for having lower declines than other states. The fact that we're declining at all is frustrating. And then lastly, you look at these reports, Brandon, of what's being taught in classrooms right now, of the objectionable materials that you've got teachers and administrators fighting to keep in the schools. Things that, if little Brandon had shown up, 8th grade, with a porn magazine under your arm, you would have been expelled. Today, you can just go into the library and peruse it, from the shelves.
Yeah.
And that, it's just mind-numbing. And then to top it off, now we just reported yesterday, South by Southwest is having their conference this spring, taxpayer subsidized, in which they want teachers to use taxpayer dollars to come to the taxpayer subsidized conference to learn about porn literacy.
Yeah.
And if you're wondering what's porn literacy, it is exactly what it sounds like.
Wow. Anytime you have the word porn and anything about curriculum together, they don't mix, right? There's no porn forward curriculum that is supposed to be in elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, and yet that is what they're going to be talking about at this conference. Now the conference is coming up early next year. But like you said, this is something that school districts are paying teachers, paying administrators to go to. They even have a little form on their website that essentially is a pre-filled form you can fill out to give to your superintendent or your principal.
Please use
whoever.
tax dollars to send to me to this very important educational conference.
And I think, to wrap this up together, you see this happening. You see what has been happening, like we talked about with the national test scores, with test scores going down. And then it makes you really wonder about these bonds, how necessary it is that we put more money into them. I believe it was Republican Party of Texas Chairman Matt Rinaldi had a tweet earlier this week which said, remember to vote no on the bond, whatever bond, wherever you are, doesn't matter, right?
It was quite fun looking at the response that the Chairman Rinaldi got for that. On the one hand, taxpayers, yay. On the other hand, you had the scolding, but my brother-in-law really needs this contract. That's why we voted. Just amazing the tone deafness that you see in public education right now. Hopefully, parents and taxpayers will see through it so we can get some better results.
Absolutely. Well, and they certainly have another opportunity with Election Day coming up. Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you for everybody for watching. If you're watching us on YouTube, go ahead, hit like, hit subscribe, hit that notification bell so you can be notified every time we have new content for you here at Texas Scorecard. For right now, I'm Brandon Waltons. Have a great weekend.
You made it to the end of this video. You're probably 1 in a million. But since you're here, make sure you go to TexasScorecard.com to find more journalism and commentary, all things pertaining to Texas. Make sure you also like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and hit the bell. That way you can be notified when new videos come out. Thanks.